So, patient people, we are getting to the difficult part in the afternoon where you're all losing your energy and thinking about dinner. But before that, we're going to get to what I think is one of the hardest and more politically sensitive aspects of free movement this afternoon, but tackling the issues of social and cultural aspects of free movement and perceptions of free movement. To tackle these issues robustly is key to the sustainability of the regime in the long term. I think we've mentioned multiple times today that the elections in the UK last week have brought these issues back to the fore, and as a British national, I'm very deeply aware of this. But why are some of these issues so hard to address? Well, because within the European Union, differences persist, whether it's social security systems, both in concept and in function, differing across Europe, or the nature of flows from one country to another. Those differences remain quite far forward in the minds of particularly EU citizens, whether mobile or not. But one of the fundamental premises is that of equal treatment, irrespective of the country in which you're living and working. So this is a deeply technical issue, but it's also become a political issue. And finally, it's also about perspective. We may all value our rights as potential free movers very greatly, but we may resent the rights of others to move as freely as we do. The second aspect of this is that facts and evidence are no longer playing a rational role in public debates. There is a near obsessive focus on numbers, but not always without context and meaning. And efforts to redress the evidence base, particularly those from official quarters, and it's unfortunate for those, I think, working in Brussels, are mistrusted, particularly those who focus solely on economic contributions and focus less on social impacts. People feel preached at rather than talked to. And there is a question as to whether current strategies to inform people about the realities of free movement are taking the right approach. They possibly needed a smarter response. The perception issue is a very real challenge to the function of free movement, the free movement principle in practice. But there are also very real social challenges. We're fearful of confronting these directly. Why? Because there's a fear of fanning public and political narratives that have become negative towards the role of mobile EU workers in national economies and societies, and to admit the existence of problems may be to risk legitimizing these narratives still further. Unfortunately, the opposite tends to be true. By avoiding discussion and dissembling and pretending all is well, EU institutions and political leaders may risk flaming the sense of mistrust that publics currently feel towards their governments on a range of issues, in addition to immigration. There's a need for some deep consideration as to how to challenge some of these challenges, rather than just focusing on puncturing myths, and perhaps we can start getting into that during the panel this afternoon. But to give you an idea of the range of issues we should be really investing is really understanding the role of public service provision, particularly at the local level. How can local authorities effectively predict their populations from one year to the next and plan and be able to resource public service provision effectively for the good of all, whether mobile or non-mobile? How can classrooms assure that they can deal with the needs of mobile EU citizens of the smaller stature and ensure their language and other needs are addressed? This is also an issue of mobility. If the parents move around and the children move around, how does that affect their education in the long term? There's a sad reality that destitution amongst mobile EU citizens is a challenge that many European cities are facing. People who fall out of social security support can find themselves extremely vulnerable, extremely quickly. And what kind of support is there for those who find themselves working either in the shadow economy or in temporary labour that means they cannot build up the kind of support that they need? The complexity of accessing social security contributions in more than one country. I've moved multiple times in my life, but only from one EU country to a second. And this may have something to do with Belgium, but the complexity of the social security system and understanding how that fits together with my native social security system is something I struggle with on a yearly basis, around this time of year specifically. And community cohesion overall, when we think big about our communities, in a context of high churn. And for migration researchers, churn means people coming in and people leaving in a very mobile fashion. How do you maintain communities when the community itself is constantly shifting and changing and its needs are constantly shifting and changing? What impact does this have on residents and social security overall? Fast-paced change can breed a sense of insecurity and mistrust, even when the community itself thrives upon the contributions of those newcomers. The two can still work in parallel. So the goal of this panel is to examine some of these realities and explore what possible remedies might be considered. We have a slightly truncated panel for this afternoon, so I'd like to ask our speakers if they could limit themselves to 10, maximum 15 minutes, so that we could perhaps have a little more of a discussion towards the end of this. And I would like to start with Klára Fóti, who's a research manager at Eurofound, where she's currently overseeing a project to look at the impacts of free movement on public service provision in Europe. And before working at Eurofound, she worked as a senior research fellow at the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in Budapest. So you know exactly what I mean when I say adding up all those social security contributions in different countries.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Liz. Thank you. And thank you very much for the invitation, for the organizers. It's a pleasure to be here in Riga, in Latvia, where I have never been before. I had a small walk in the city this morning, very early morning, and I really liked it. So it's really nice to be here. And I'm also very pleased to present preliminary findings of my most recent research, which actually has not been entirely finalized as yet, although I wish I had finalized it before. But it's still a kind of a work in progress. So apologize if not always the data or even the conclusions are not complete. I don't want to deal too much with to show the first slide to you for too long, because I think obviously you know the context, you know the background. We were talking about that for quite some time in the morning and also early afternoon. You know the theory of welfare dependency of migrants and the problems of the EU citizens. And here, in my research, I just want to tell you that we deliberately focused on the EU mobile citizens of that group of EU mobile citizens who came from Eastern Europe after the 2004 and the 2007 enlargement. So we call them EU10, which is often the case, but I think, again, this is quite familiar for you. And just a very quick outline of my research. We actually analyzed and explored the impact on public services in 9 host countries, which are the following: Austria, UK, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, Spain, Denmark, Sweden, and Ireland. So we thought that these are really those key host countries, which are quite interesting in this regard. And we were quite ambitious as regards the topics. Now I'm realizing it when I'm preparing the final consolidated overview report, because we, as a background, again, for our research, for explaining the differences in the take-up of services, we wanted to analyze first the socio-demographic profile of mobile citizens, which have already been a topic which has already been examined on labor force survey by some excellent researchers. But in this case, we did these 9 host countries, we did some country studies. So we have some data from the countries directly concerned. So I'm just saying that although in my presentation I'm using some Eurostat data, but I am in a very convenient position as regards the previous debate on the data and the data shortcomings, because these data, even those which I quote from Eurostat, these all reflect the so-called mirror statistics, so the host countries, their statistics. So in a way, of course, there are shortcomings, there are various caveats, but I don't want to detail that because I don't have time for that. So we had two parts, the quantitative part, which is actually based on the data, and the qualitative part, because we also thought that this is a topic, especially when it comes to not only the benefits. Sometimes we could find some quite good data on the benefits, but we were actually kind of asked by the Commission before to try to focus on services, and this was quite challenging. And I think we could find some quite interesting information by the qualitative part. So first about the extent, again, I think you had quite, we had some quite nice presentation about the extent, so again, it won't be for you very surprising. Just to call your attention to the fact that it is far, where the share of the EU 10 mobile citizens is higher is Ireland. It is 5%. And even, I mean, although there are, as we can see from the absolute data, in Germany, in the UK, in Spain and in Italy, the absolute numbers are quite high, but the share is much lower than in Ireland. A specifically interesting case is the Netherlands. It has already been told that Netherlands was one of the countries where the Interior Minister actually signed that letter to the EU presidency in April 2013. And we can see here that their share, it is actually, the share is the lowest, 0.8%. But again, these are the data, the official data. I was told by a government official, a Dutch government official, but that they don't talk about 126,000 EU 10 citizens, they talk about 400,000 citizens living in the Netherlands. And of course, you can imagine then the share is much higher, perhaps one of the highest again among the countries. So even when it comes, I just wanted to highlight that, but even when it comes to the extent, the most basic data, there are real challenging and difficulties. And this, I think that, but this slide, which shows the increase and the trends, this is, I think, is quite something which we could believe, really. Two examples, Denmark and Germany. And as far as Germany is concerned, I just want to highlight that the bulk of the inflow of EU citizens comes from these EU 10 citizens. So in the previous 3 years, mainly East European citizens went to Germany. So, and now some data about the age profile. Again, perhaps it's, for you, it's not really surprising, but what is interesting, and these are really, I think, quite good data from the country study in the UK, we can see how extremely young the population of the EU 10 citizens is. If, you know, on the right-hand side, you can see the EU citizens versus the natives. Not surprising that the age composition of the natives is much more balanced. But as we can see, the highest is in the age group of 25 and 29 and 30 and 34, which is really which means really that they are in a working age population, prime age, working age population, and very young people. And even if we actually compare that with other migrants groups, namely with the EU 16, so the other EU citizens and the third country nationals, we can see that their, although, of course, the third country nationals' age composition is, again, tend to be quite young, but they are much more balanced. And now about the employment level. Again, I don't think that I say too much new, but I think it is interesting to see that in the UK, in Italy and in Ireland, the employment rate of the EU 10 citizens is actually higher than the natives themselves. And the highest is in the UK, 80.3%. And it's much higher, so despite the crisis. Although these are Eurostat data, but I think that in this regard, this could be regarded as at least as quite reasonable. and quite reliable. And when we see the trends as far as the employment is concerned, of course, we can see the impact of the crisis. If we see the overall picture, there is a downward trend, but still, again, even if we see it on an overall level, the EU 10 citizens' employment rate is higher in the EU 15 countries than the natives themselves, if we see it as a picture overall. And if we see it in Germany, again, it's not surprising that there is an upward trend, as we could see in one of the previous presentations. It is in Germany. It was in Germany where the unemployment rate is one of the lowest. I think it was about, as far as I remember, 6%. In Austria, it was 4%. So again, but that actually reflects a better performance of the EU 10 citizens as well. And the Ireland and the UK's example, again, two countries where the employment rate of the EU 10 citizens is higher than the natives themselves. These are, again, there is a bit of a downward trend, but the difference is, especially in the case of Ireland, is a bit decreased, but not much. Unfortunately, Spain, that's quite clear, but Italy is another story. Especially as far as the labor market performance of the EU 10 citizens are concerned. And now some slides about the results of my research, the growth so the unemployment recipients in Germany. There is a growth, but of course these are absolute numbers. So this actually reflects that the inflow was quite high in recent years. In Denmark, in the case of Denmark, again, there was a decrease in Danish, in the take-up of unemployment benefit among Danish citizens, but this wasn't really the cause of the labor market situation, but rather a change in the rules. The entitlement period for unemployment benefit was reduced in Denmark from 4 to 2 years precisely in 2010, and that is reflected in the data. And mainly it was the Danish citizens whose entitlement period for unemployment benefit was rather high. In Sweden, the story is more or less the same. We can see that the unemployment benefit take-up is higher in the case of the EU 10 mobile citizens. And if we see the general picture, then we can see that even if in those services and those benefits which are directly related to labor market, unemployment benefit, employment services, even if in some countries at least, or in many countries, the take-up is higher by the EU 10 citizens. Usually there are other benefits and other services. These are the disability services, sickness benefit, pensions, where the take-up is much lower, which actually offset, as it was told, the relatively higher take-up, and as a result, the fiscal balance is basically positive, as it was told. So, these are just, again, some slides concerning the Netherlands and the UK. There are some benefits, actually, where, for example, the tax credits and also the child benefit, where the take-up is higher, according to my data at least. But if we see the overall picture, where the pension is included, again, the take-up is lower in the case of the EU 10 mobile citizens. And finally, some results from our qualitative research. Mainly, it is the information and language where we can find gaps in the provision of services. And also, it was mentioned several times that tension is very visible on a local level, especially in the UK and Germany. We found these countries where this was really quite strong. And as a consequence of the crisis, there were some confusions about the provision itself, even with the staff of the providers, of the service providers, especially this was reported especially in Spain. And yeah, I think that these are the draft conclusions. I think it is important to develop the inclusion measures, including the language courses, that the information services, and these are just some thoughts about possible future pattern, which could be also, I mean, what I haven't mentioned here, but I think it is important, and I think it is rather, from your research, it is quite clear that if they climb up, the EU 10 citizens climb up on the occupational ladder, which is quite realistically could be expected, then it means that they actually will even pay more into the budget. And it is also true that with school services and other public services, the expenses could be even higher than now. So thank you very much for your attention. That was what I wanted to tell you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think it's very interesting, your preliminary conclusions in terms of how to manage localized tension, but also thinking about the bigger picture at the same time. We look forward to that report. If I can ask Ylva Tivéus to now take the floor. She is a member of the board of the Europeans throughout the world, who we've seen. Yes. And we'll speak a little about their work on dealing with the social impact.
Well, thank you very much. And I understand we have to run through a little bit our presentations, and I will try to do my very best. Because our president of this organization, he already introduced what Europeans throughout the world is all about and what we are fighting for. And as you've heard, we're fighting for the 80 million expats that we have, those who are living in another country than their own. Even though that this conference, I believe, have been mainly concentrating on the 14 million Europeans who are living and working in another EU country. I think that it has been quite duly established by now that during all the previous sessions that there is no doubt that cross-border movement of people is indeed contributing to the overall prosperity and growth. And I think the statement is very much true that people move to get a job or to get a better job, and they are not moving to get into other countries' welfare systems, as is sometimes indicated. Actually, to leave your country and to move to another has its cost and is sometimes a bit of a risky endeavor. We get a magnitude of evidence from our members and member organizations that it is not without social and economic sacrifices to leave your home country, and it's not without challenges to return. In some cases, actually, being an expat equals becoming an ex-citizen of your own country. The problem, according to us, is that there is no coherent European policy to help all these European citizens, which in all, as we heard, represents some 12% of the EU's total population. There is no policy that is addressing other aspects and not just those aspects that are employment related, as we have heard quite a lot about during the morning. So our organization, Europeans Throughout the World, is therefore advocating for a new European expatriates policy to be prepared, a policy which, of course, must involve both national and European competencies. I think that the challenge that we are facing, and that we hear also from our member organization, is not just about the numbers or about brain drain or about welfare system, but it is indeed to give more opportunities and chances and support and incentives to exercise the right of free movement. And for that, we need to grant our mobile citizens the same right as full-time residents in the receiving countries, wherever they live in the European Union. And I want to touch upon some of the rights or the challenges that have not been touched upon yet. And those are, for instance, the democratic rights, of course, which has not been touched upon, but citizens who move to another country are losing many of their most important democratic rights, such as the one to vote in legislative elections at home or abroad, and as a consequence, they also lose the right to vote in the European elections. And this is against the EU Treaty and against the Charter of Fundamental Rights, because voting rights is part of European citizenship. And despite this, you know that we have this so-called disenfranchisement still existing in several forms in some member states. Those member states where we still have this is, you know, Cyprus and Denmark, Ireland, Malta, and the UK. But gladly we have some reports now that there are some movements in Malta, I believe, and also in Ireland, where there are some ideas now to let the first generation of immigrants vote in the elections for the Senate. And I believe that there is a promise now also after the election from the Tories in the UK to get rid of this 15-year rule. Another interesting development is taking place also in Luxembourg, where there will be a referendum next month to seek support and to allow I think they have some 45% foreigners to vote in legislative elections if they have lived in the country during the last 10 years. I also have heard now that during the recent UK elections, we have been also signaled that various constituencies failed to send out the ballot papers to British citizens abroad in time so that they could register and that they could vote in good time before the elections. It seems that out of these, after the 4 million expatriates living outside UK, only some 113,000 actually registered. And we believe that in order to make it easier for expatriates to participate in elections, it should be possible to vote electronically, and this is something that we will be fighting for, and we also hope that this will be a reality at the latest in time for the 2019 European elections. Other aspects is of course connected to that there are less access to their own culture and personal ties from back home, at the same time as you have to adapt to to cultural differences and face problem also in finding information on, for instance, mobility opportunities and vacancies. And I think that EURES was mentioned earlier today, which is a database of vacancies across Europe, and there's very little information and knowledge about this. Language training for children in their mother tongue is also a burning issue, and this also brings us to other family-related problems because with more and more mobile citizens, the need for changing school systems becomes more frequent, with difficult transfers of children from one national educational system to another, and we have a lack of recognition of skills and qualifications between systems and between countries. I think another aspect is also the challenge of, in today's society, of finding not just one job, but to find 2 jobs, because usually you move with your partner, and as we hear that most young people have tertiary education, they certainly have a partner who also wants to have a job if they are moving. Another issue is, of course, also for accompanying spouses, which is usually a female, women's problem, and this is quite serious, because if you don't get employment, you will also risk to end up with no old age pension rights at all. So there are a number of issues that I think needs to be addressed, also the insufficient assistance upon return. I think that there will be lots of discussions also tomorrow about return and about diasporas and so forth. But there are a lot of local initiatives that I think will be worth sharing between member states to see what could be done to support newcomers to a country. And we have seen and learned some examples from a Commission study, but I know that there are also many other good examples in the member states and also services that are given by different expatriate organizations. So homecoming policy, I think, is also important. I will not go so much into the perceptions and attitudes, because I also heard that my colleague from the Commission is going to do that. But I think that we need to, in any case, when we talk about homecoming policies, I think it's important that there are some sort of welcome back home offices to assist those who returns to, when it comes to finding new employment, to get recognition maybe of their experiences and of working in foreign cultures and in foreign languages, and to find places for the children. One thing that we would wish to encourage is that member states appoint someone in each government with special responsibilities for their citizens living outside the country. Like, for instance, we know the example of Ireland, where there is a Minister for Diaspora Affairs, but this is not very usual and not very frequent among the EU member states. And it was pointed out to me just in the pause here that Germany, for instance, has got so many expatriates and so many foreigners working in their country, they do not at all have anyone who is responsible for these kind of issues. There are examples in some of our member states of what we call expats parliaments, which is a very good initiative that we can find in some of the countries, in Finland and in France, in Sweden and in Switzerland, which allows for a two-way communication and also allows to bring forward problems and find solutions to someone who is responsible in the government. So these are issues that I think are actually, they are barriers to, that risks to make mobility and migration less attractive, which is detrimental actually to the intentions behind the right to free movement and the single market. So I believe that if we want more mobility, which we are all talking about, we need a coherent European policy to help and to support, as the Parliament Secretary said this morning, those who have the courage and who make the effort to move. And I think that this involves decision makers at both national and European level. And the expatriate organizations that are in daily contact with hundreds of thousands of the ones concerned should be closely involved and consulted on such a policy. I would like then also to just to mention, because we have talked about statistics and the need for statistics, because we need facts and we need to get the facts right. And this is also a way to counteract all the scaremongering, the myths and so forth. And now I heard that the Eurostat's Director-General, he says that you cannot measure things that you don't see. But I think that there are a number of things that we should try to look a little bit more closely to. For instance, on the statistical evidence, I think that we need to know more about the local level where free movement has a particular impact, but also about looking more about the mobile Europeans outside the EU and in the world. I think we know very little about the migrants. Are they salary workers? Are they self-employed? Are they commuters? Are they family members, students, pensioners? I think there we don't have sufficient evidence and sufficient facts and figures. I also think that the research has neglected the immigrants or the immigration of EU nationals toward third countries and also the number of people born outside the EU living in another member state. So all in all, I would like to say that we have also studied the recommendations and the conclusions from this conference, and ETTW is wholeheartedly behind the recommendation and the concrete proposal that we have seen also being made by the EU presidency to designate a European year to the mobile citizens. I think that all evidence we have heard from the panels and all the recommendations that are proposed in the background document point in the same direction and to the same conclusions. It is time to honor mobility and put a focus on the positive impact, not only on economy and growth, but also for the citizens themselves to fulfill their personal development and dreams, and for the mutual understanding and solidarity between the people of the EU. EU is the union between citizens, which we should not forget, and free movement, I think, is a right in itself. So it should not always be connected to the economic impact and employment, as was also said by the judge this morning. So we believe that the time has come to mobilize all interested parties, the European institutions, the member states, national expats organizations, civil society, media, for a Europe-wide campaign. Also, our chairperson talked about the necessity of wise communication, and we think that this is one of the advantages to focus and to designate a year dedicated to mobility and to migrant citizens. These past European years, they have actually proven useful in that they have helped to raise awareness, they have triggered research, surveys, statistics, and some have even tested and paved the way for new political initiatives or EU competencies, new legislation, and so forth. And I think it's also a way to force different departments and different policies to really work and come together. So for us, I will skip these ones because we have understood that this is a little bit, we have a lack of time, but the main overall purpose of a year of mobile citizens should be, among other things, to defend the rights to free movement for all EU citizens, to address the genuine concerns related to free movement by getting the facts right, and also to lay foundations for a consistent and comprehensive European policy integrating all aspects related to EU citizens' mobility and migration. And this includes macroeconomic aspects that we have heard a lot about during the morning and the early day, and the better monitoring of the intra-European labour, but also all these social and cultural aspects that I touched upon, the democratic aspects, the issue of return migration, and working with the diaspora communities. So all in all, we are very much in favor and fully supporting the recommendations that we have seen and what we have learned also from the different background papers. And we are grateful actually to the Latvian presidency for highlighting these issues and also to, in a way, put the wheels in motion, and we are quite confident that this will continue during the next coming presidencies as well. Our president said we have already been in contact with them, and I believe that this is exactly what we need. So if you are interested in supporting this, you will always know where to find us, and you will also see that there are some documents outside that you are free to take and to look at. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As your title suggests, we can find you throughout the world. But thank you for raising some very interesting points. And I think some of those, particularly the role of the home country in this process, there's a tendency to focus only on the host country, and we actually have to think about the whole continuum of that journey, including return. And also something I hope we come back to in discussion, which is skills use. It's all very well for the mobile EU citizen to be highly skilled, but if there's no opportunity to utilize those skills or indeed develop those skills over time, then that represents a loss not just for an individual, but for Europe as a whole. And with that, I would like to move to our third speaker, Ambassador Elisabeth Tichy-Fisslberger, who is Ambassador and Director-General for Legal and Consular Affairs in the Federal Ministry for Europe, Integration and Foreign Affairs in Austria, and you're also the Austrian Coordinator on Combating Human Trafficking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, even if I don't have much time, as I understand, I would like to thank the organizers very much for inviting me to this very interesting conference and also to this lovely town of Riga. It is my second visit. The first time I was here, by coincidence, was one of the days, which only happens once in 5 years' time, when there's the big song festival. I learned a lot about Latvia, I think, during that one night. And now I'm learning other things from a different angle, and it's wonderful to be here, so thank you very much. I feel a little bit like in this sketch, you know, where one person says everything has been said, and the other one says yes, but not by everybody. So I wonder in this constellation what could be added to the things which haven't been said yet at this conference. So maybe what I could bring is a perspective from a country of destination of migration. That's something we haven't heard so much yet today. My own country has a rather long tradition of, let's say, being a melting pot, which goes back well into history. There has been quite a lot of migration too in the 20th century, even before we joined the European Union, like in 1956 with the Hungarian Revolution, and later on in 1968 with the Czechoslovakia, as then was in 1980 Poland. Today we have 20% of our population who are said to have a migration background. That's a rather wide definition, including people who have become Austrian citizens. It also includes people of Austrian nationality born abroad. But all in all, we have 1.2 million people who are first-generation migrants to Austria out of 8 million, and 500,000 who are second generation. Compared to that, we consider we have 500,000 Austrians who live somewhere abroad. So, as you may remember from one of the slides we have seen this morning, we come right behind the United Kingdom when it comes to population having migrated to Austria. Migration is not one way. We get about 150,000 a year migrating into Austria, and about 100,000 migrating out of Austria. So there is quite a coming and going. And on the whole, of all the mobility we have, 57% are European citizens. Against this background of a long migration history and all the problems it has brought about, the government has started 3 years ago something which we call integration policy. And that integration policy has moved with the latest government into the foreign ministry, which we think is a very interesting combination of foreign policy and certain repercussions of the foreign policy which we get at home. And ever since we started that integration policy, we understand from opinion polls that the climate for migration has improved. People say from 30% to 49% think it's positive. And we understand that there were 56% who felt Austrian, more or less, before we started this integration policy, and now there are 70%. So it helps to focus on migrants. Across the statistics, you can see there are certain problems which occur again and again with migrant populations. There is, even though that is the migrant population at large, there is a higher degree of people who do not finish school than nationals. There is a higher degree of unemployment. There is a higher degree of housing problems, and there is a higher risk of poverty. Of course, all these figures are much better when you look only at the migrants coming from the EU, with the possible exception of one group which has already been mentioned, by the Commissioner, which is the Roma population. We have this rather wide field of discussion about EU migration, which of course is in the first place, this is not migration, this is EU free circulation of citizens. It has the big advantage of doing away, or at least working against the shadow economy. Once you have the right to circulate freely, you are not left to the black market anymore, which reduces a lot of problems. You have the right to all kinds of social benefits, and they have already been mentioned, like access to the health system, access to the education system, access to unemployment assistance if necessary, housing, and what have you. Since one of the topics of this panel is about perceptions of migration, that is something which hasn't been talked about very much yet, and so maybe I can give you a glimpse of the debate which we have at home. And that is a debate which does not focus entirely on European free circulation. It's almost impossible to separate the free circulation of European citizens from migration at large. And of course, people only see the things which are problematic. So this is why we have a difficult debate where lots of things get intermingled. There is the popular press mix up inter-EU mobility with legal migration of third country citizens, with illegal migration of third country citizens, and even with the whole refugee debate, which is currently dominating a lot the public discussion, at least in my country, because we are quite exposed to it. There is also the fact that you have rather unequal repercussions of this mobility or migration. It doesn't hit all the countries in the same way, and it doesn't hit all the groups of population in the same way. What we find from our statistics is that all these kinds of phenomena, whether inter-EU or third country mobility, has a lot more effects, or at least can have a lot of more effects on the poorer and the less educated part of the population. And these are the ones that the popular press cater for. And that's sometimes where the problems come from. UK elections have already been mentioned. There it was a big debate. We have a lot in our press, this entire problem of migration from the Mediterranean, which, as you know, has increased considerably. It has increased by 140% between 2013 and 2014. This year, they expect 500,000 migrants coming from the Mediterranean, so that's about a quarter of the population of Latvia coming in just 1 year. They say, which adds to the interest of the popular press, that there are about 300 to 600 billion euros involved in criminal profits for all these traffickers and people smugglers. And they say there is up to 1 million people waiting at the southern rim of the Mediterranean. We know this has nothing to do with inter-EU mobility, but it gets mixed up in the public debate. One of the reasons why it does get mixed up in my country is that there is a rather unequal distribution within Europe of that kind of migration. There are about 90% of those migrants who go to only 10 countries, including ours. And just to mention one figure, they say that Sweden actually takes 7 times the share it would have to take compared to its population, and Austria takes about 3 times the share. So this is why we are having this debate. And since the popular press are launching this debate, politicians cannot avoid responding to it one way or another. So it is important, first of all, to distinguish the different phenomena and to make it very clear what we are talking about. Therefore, I might say that it is not enough to respond to that debate by producing statistics, as is often done by the European Commission. It just doesn't change the debate in any way if you tell people it's not a big problem, it only concerns 5% or whatever. You have to take that debate somehow seriously. Of course, the elements of the debate have been mentioned. There is a demographic problem. In most of the European countries, we do not have enough children to keep up the population as it is. There's a need for labor in certain areas, in particular the health sector, taking care of the elderly, and there's a lot of the flexibility in the labor market, which of course is being filled by this free circulation within the EU. We all know that mobility is the oldest strategy to fight poverty in the world, and it still works very well in modern-day European Union. There is the subject of brain waste, people going away and working somewhere well below their qualifications. There is the debate on remittances, which of course is wonderful for the countries of where the remittances land, the countries of destination of remittances, but actually quite an obstacle to the persons having exercised their right to mobility, because usually they tend already not to earn very much money where they have gone, and then they send money back home, so there's not much left to them, sometimes not enough for the education of their children and so on. The European Court of Justice has already been mentioned today. Of course, venerable institution, which we are all watching and being bound by, and Judge Levitz has explained some of the cases. I would just like to mention that it is interesting to watch how the European Court of Justice, in its turn, adapts to developments and reacts to what is going on in the European Union. The Dano case has been mentioned, where the European Court of Justice addressed one of these subjects which are being voiced very much in some of the richer countries, which is welfare tourism, and said it is not possible for an EU citizen to migrate or to move to another EU country just for the purpose of benefiting from the welfare system there. That was actually quite a considerable change to a previous judgment by the Court of Justice in the case of Bray, where the court, again a German case, had said as long as the German budget can somehow finance it, they should go on financing it. And that caused an outcry in Germany, and so it seems the Court of Justice has adapted to that a little bit. There was also a very problematic case, discussed problematically, in particular in Denmark and in Ireland, called Metok, and that was all about surrogate marriage, where the Court of Justice somehow didn't really address that problem, the sham marriages, which can be quite a problem in some countries. So, as I said earlier on, people only see the cases where problems are being caused. People don't see the millions of Europeans who have moved somewhere, who are integrating nicely, who do not cause a problem at all. There was a lot of talk about those at this conference, but they're generally not even taken that much account of in the general public. What people see, unfortunately, is where the problems are, and that is why, personally, I think the political establishment has not only to revert to statistics, but really fight the prejudices which are coming with all that, with the perceptions of prejudices. So from our Austrian experience, we can say a very targeted policy of integration of non-citizens can be very successful. The motto our politicians have chosen, integration by performance, on the one hand, so the non-citizens are invited to learn the language, in particular to learn about the culture and the history of the country in order to be able to adapt to it as quickly as they can. But what the state offers in return, on the other hand, is something which we call a culture of welcome, and which we are trying to develop in a new way. So this is a policy to make people feel at home from the very beginning. Sometimes even before they leave their own countries, they can come to our embassies. They're given all the information they need, not only about how to go there, but also about how to take up a language course, which school the children to send to, how to arrange for health insurance even before they enter the country, and all kinds of things. So it is a give and take. You learn the language, you learn about us, but we take care of you. We give you all the information from day one so that you have the best possible conditions for settling down. All this in order to take care of the persons coming, and there is also an initiative to take account of qualifications that people bring with them that can be difficult to get recognized in the first place. You're already looking at me, and I will just make one final paragraph because I was asked to do so. we do have an experience of human trafficking even with EU citizens. This is one area, as was mentioned earlier on, where I am the national coordinator in Austria. It is a sad thing to say that even today in the European Union, which is one of the most developed systems in the world, we have not only human trafficking, but in a country like Austria, it is actually the majority of victims of human trafficking that we get who have an EU nationality. In most cases, this is back to the Roma problem. In most cases, these victims are somehow of Roman origin. We have cases of forced prostitution. We have causes of forced begging. We have causes of forced labor. And we also have, which is the saddest, trafficking in children. Because children, as you know, are the easiest group to handle for traffickers because they cannot be put into prisons and they will never run away from the traffickers because they wouldn't know where to go in a foreign country. So there is still a lot to do in the European Union. Fortunately, we have the system of free circulation which will allow us to even out some of the problems. But the system will not just work by itself. There is a lot to do by politicians, and it'll still be quite some fight. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, and I'm reminded of the fact that 2 years ago during the Austrian presidency you hosted your own conference looking at Europeans on the move, which was exactly these sorts of issues, and we had the opportunity to see some of the support services that are also extended to EU citizens, whether it be introduction services or language services in Austria. And I think it is a case that there are things that member states can do in addition to the European Commission to actually smooth the process of mobility within Europe. But with that in mind, I'd like to turn to our last speaker, Marie-Hélène Boulanger, who is the head of the Citizenship, Rights and Free Movement Unit in DG Justice in the European Commission, who's going to tell us some of the ways in which they support free movers within the European Union. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I would like also to thank the presidency for this conference and also the European Tour of the World because it's a very interesting debate. And on my side, I would like to start with some semantic because we have heard so many things about EU migrants, third country national, and mobile EU citizens. And what I will present you is from the perspective of European citizenship, which is mobility, free movement from the perspective of European citizens. So this has nothing to do with third country national, it's only the perspective of free movement. And as I take it from this perspective, the rights linked to citizenship, I would like at the end of my presentation, which I know I need to keep short, to say a few words about other rights which might be relevant and also linked to EU citizenship. I will not say it all, so I will go quickly through some slides, but they will be there and you can read them later on if you're interested to do so. Maybe start by quickly some figures which have already been said to show that in the European Union the level of mobility remains relatively low compared to other parts of the world. And then you have different slides which show you that, including country by country. And maybe come to something which has not been said earlier, or I've missed it maybe, which is what we have said is that free movement is one of the 4 fundamental freedoms of the internal market. It's also a right which is directly protected by the Charter of Fundamental Rights and also by the treaty. But as we speak about perception, it's also interesting to see that for European citizens, this is the right which is the most closely associated with citizenship. And my unit is responsible for a directive, which is Directive on Free Movement, and quite often people call it the Citizenship Directive. So you see this close interconnection between the two. Now, this is also the most well-known EU citizenship right. about 90% of the European citizens know that they enjoy this right. This is also the most important achievement of the European Union. When you ask to citizens, they mention that this as the first one, and peace comes only at second. So when we launch Eurobarometer and this kind of study, which is the reply we get. And citizens, when they ask about free movement rights, they also see it as an economic benefit for their country. So about perception and so forth, it has already been mentioned that there is, since 2013, a debate in certain member states about benefit tourism, social inclusion challenge, and abuse and fraud, and especially the topic of sham marriage triggered some discussion. Some previous speakers have referred to the letter of the 4 ministers, which was linked to this concern. Now, some factors contributed to this debate. It was the end of the transitional arrangement for some member states. There is also the financial and economic crisis. Also, and this has been mentioned by the previous speaker, conflation between immigration and free movement. And finally, discourse based on perception rather than on fact. Just to mention what the Commission did in this context, and in 2013, end of the year, the Commission has issued a communication with some facts and figures showing that the profile of mobile EU citizens, the driver of mobility and economic impact, also highlighting the safeguard contained in the EU law, and mentioning 5 actions to help national authorities and local authorities. I will not go through the facts and figures because we have already seen many figures today. Maybe come to this one, where we have seen from our studies that mobile EU citizens are net contributors to the public purse in most member states. And since 2013, there have been additional studies which demonstrate the same. We have heard also additional figures today. And also, another interesting element is that there is no correlation between the generosity of welfare systems and inflow of mobile EU citizens. You see the figures in some member states. I'll continue. Now, regarding the challenge which are linked to free movement, there is anecdotal evidence that there are some challenge. The social inclusion challenge has just been mentioned. For instance, some places face suddenly large inflow of marginalized EU citizens. You have some homeless people in some member states, and there are challenges, especially at local level, but there is no evidence that it happens everywhere. Regarding abuse, there is also some, I would say, feedback, because we speak especially about perception, about a lot of abuse. Now, the data we have, they show that basically there is a low magnitude of the problem. There is no statistical evidence regarding this. In this context, the Commission has highlighted that the existing rules contain robust safeguards that member states can use, first of all, to prevent excessive burden to the public finance of the member states. So what does it mean? Is that member states are free to decide which social assistance benefit they want to set up, which condition they are going to pay them. So in clear, EU rules do not ask member states to grant benefits unconditionally to everyone. Regarding the fight against abuse and fraud, this is the responsibility of member states' authority, and the Commission is supporting this work. Just to give one concrete example, which has already been mentioned, last year in September, the Commission has published a handbook to address marriage of convenience, and this is a handbook which has been prepared in close cooperation with Member States authority. Now, in the current situation, what we do, basically we follow up the use of this handbook, and we collect figures also with Member States authority. So this is not a point. Regarding the social inclusion challenge, in the communication, it was made clear that at least 20% of the funding coming from the European Social Fund should be spent on social inclusion. So a lot of focus on social inclusion. And I don't know if you have heard already, the Commission is preparing a colloquium for fundamental rights, and in this context, again, the issue of inclusive society, social inclusion will be one of the key topics. Also, the application of free movement rules on the ground. We give support to have a proper understanding, a good training regarding these rules. And last but not least, the promotion of welcome culture, the exchange of best practice on social inclusion. Regarding the support to national authorities, which is also a way to address misconception, I would like to mention that on training, we are preparing an e-learning tool for administrative authorities. So this is a tool which will be given to member states that will be used at all, I would say, level for people dealing especially with residence rights. So to apply the free movement directive at all levels. And this is a tool which will be prepared in all languages and with common reference for local administration to really know via this training how to implement the rule. And we will accompany via specific training the launching of this tool. Also, we have started some training with judicial authorities, which is also a very important priority for the Commission. There are many training activities linked to judicial authorities. We had a very interesting first seminar, and now we work with Association of Judges to continue this training. Regarding the welcoming attitude to free movement, indeed, and it has been said, it's very important to have an informed discussion and to dispel misperception by spelling out reality. It's important to tackle the root cause and challenge arising in the context of mobility. So sometimes you hear in the perception that some problems are linked to free movement, when it can be a poverty problem, discrimination problem, exploitation of workers. So this is why we work on the promotion, exchange and dissemination of good practice developed locally. To just give you an idea of some events that took place and some other which are in the pipeline beyond the colloquium for fundamental rights that I just mentioned. In 2014, there was a conference with mayors on the impact on intra-EU mobility at local level. Why with mayors? Because this is really the level to address this kind of issue. In the context of open days, last year we had a workshop on EU fund, and basically to help authorities to make use of the fund and to see how to have the best use of this fund and how to apply. And this year we will have a workshop in the autumn building an inclusive city. The point will be to look at local policies for mobile EU citizens to find their place in their host community. And we will basically start from specific projects and have exchange on basis of specific projects. We had also a study on the impact on free movement of EU citizens at local level, which I will not take in all detail. You will see from the slides different points which have been looked at in the study. But maybe just to go to one point, this is the studies which have been selected. It shows and this confirms what we have heard today, that economically the profile of the mobile citizens, but this is already discussed, it acknowledged that some challenge exists at local level. And maybe that's an interesting slide. It gives the list of the challenges which have been identified and of the need of the newcomers, which are employment, entrepreneurship, housing, education and university, intercultural dialogue, people attitude and participation to city life. Then what we have seen is that there are many, many good practice among local places, and there is really work to be done to exchange this good practice, and this is something we want to work in the European Commission. We have started. I repeat this point because these good practices, they exist. We have heard some of them today, and we believe that by this exchange of good practice, we can improve the situation. And I wanted to show, for instance, one, which is about perception. In Barcelona, for instance, they have a strategy anti-rumor, which is interesting to dispel misperception linked to this. In general terms, what we have seen from our study is that the attitude towards mobility is improving. And that's an interesting point, this positive note regarding this attitude towards mobility. Now, I wanted also to come to another aspect of mobility, and I think one of my predecessors has mentioned that. As mobile citizens, you have the right to take part in local and European elections. And the Commission has just last Friday issued a report on the 2014 election, which I would like to present to you briefly. And I have to say this is the first time I think we present this report. And this is a report which is important because something has changed in the European Union, which is very important in the context of the European citizenship, is that there was a link between the citizen vote and the election of the Commission President. So this is the party with the largest number of seats who was the party from which the presidents of the European Commission came. So this is a complete different dimension from the participation in election. Another element which is relevant in this report is that the turnout in election, the steady fall in turnout was stemmed. So we came nearly to a halt in the fall in the turnout. Those are the candidates for the election. There was a campaign which was a pan-European campaign, which is interesting in the context of mobility, because you have this kind of pan-European campaign. This means that as European citizen exercising your right, you can recognize yourself in this European election because the campaign becomes more and more European. There you see that the candidates, basically they went in many member states to visit the citizens locally. There were debates in the different member states, which could be broadcasted in several countries by at least 152 media outlets for the final debate, for instance. Now, as a result, clearly the voters could make more easily the link between a vote and basically the political direction of the European Union, and the legitimacy of the Commission was reinforced. This slide shows you the turnout in general terms for the elections. It's general, and you see the fall and the last election, the difference is only marginal. And I would like to come to a specific point, which is the turnout. You see that the turnout for young people is very low, and also that the participation of mobile EU citizens is also very low. So this means that we have not managed yet to have a strong participation of people who exercise their right to free movement. And if you see the figures, they remain very, very limited. So one of the explanations could be that people still keep the possibility to vote in one or the other country. They can vote in the country of origin, or they can vote in the country of residence. And this is calculated on the basis of the country of residence. But this being said, the numbers and the figures remain slow. What is an improvement regarding mobile citizens, regarding the participation in the life of the host country, is the fact that the figures for EU citizens who are candidates for election has more than doubled. I will stop, I will say one word, yes. But I wanted to highlight this because this is an improvement of the situation. I want to say two things more. Another element which you will find in the slides which is relevant in the context of mobility and the rights linked to citizenship, is that a new directive has been adopted regarding the protection of unrepresented citizens. So this concerns people, Europeans, traveling outside the EU and not being represented in the country where they are and where they seek assistance. So a new directive has just been adopted, and member states will now have to implement this directive, and this is also very important in the context of mobility. And the last point I wanted to make is about the citizenship report. So the Commission is working in this context on the citizenship report, and the citizenship report, the last one, was issued in 2013. It looks at the different rights linked to citizenship, and it also looks at concrete obstacles that mobile citizens face, so concrete obstacles for people exercising their rights in the European Union. And the new citizenship report will be presented in 2016, and there will be also a public consultation, a specific Eurobarometer. I see that I can definitely not say more, and I will leave it like that, but happy to reply specific questions.
Thank you very much. I was particularly intrigued in your presentation that many of the best practices from the 6 cities you looked at were best practices that apply both to EU citizens and third country nationals. The programmes themselves are for all foreigners, which I think raises a question of how far are we talking about separate policies for EU citizens and how far are we talking about extending integration policies beyond third country nationals. And that remains a problem, I think, from the European Union perspective, because we don't want to talk about mobility as migration and keep a very separate linguistic difference, but many of the practical challenges are the same, and perhaps we can get into that in the discussion. I also would like to ask you, when we get around to this, whether the European Commission itself has instituted any of those best practices as the host of some of one of the biggest, most concentrated populations of mobile EU citizens in Europe, whether the European Commission has implemented any of its good practices for the social inclusion of Commission officials within Brussels and the Brussels environment, and the impact that has. My experience of 10 years in Brussels has been that the EU population in Brussels is the most segregated and possibly the worst integrated across Europe. And maybe there's room for us all to practice a little of what we preach. I would like to thank all of our speakers for being so generous in keeping to time. It allows us to have 15-20 minutes of discussion on all of the issues, and there have been a lot of issues that have been raised, and I'd like to invite questions from the audience. The gentleman at the back, just there, and anyone else like to signal at this point?
Hi, Raymond Cherry from Malta. I'm also Vice President of ETTW. I had 2 questions to the panel. First one is, what can the European Commission do more to fight the perception that out there in the media and in the public are coupling together the intra-mobility of European citizens and the illegal migration problem, which is a huge problem. I think we haven't even started dreaming of how big the problem is. And separating both of them, because a lot of people out there are putting them together in the same basket, and obviously some political quarters are making benefits and profits by getting votes of our citizens through this misconception. That's my first question. The second question is, I think that this conference is ultimately a historic conference. Why? And I say why. Europe is one of the probably is the only continent left in the world who has not convened a congress, a convention of its citizens to debate diaspora issues from each member state. The other continents in the world, South America, Caribbean, Africa, Asia, all the continents have for decades convened conventions of their diasporas abroad. So I think I would like to congratulate the Riga presidency and obviously the organizers of this conference, because this can be a first step for Europe as well to, for the very first time, bring to the forefront the issues of diaspora. And I think that the next step would be not only for the subsequent presidencies to organize more conferences, but the decision is taken once the citizenship report is out, or even prior to it coming out, an extensive consultative exercise takes place at local level. What are the problems faced by EU citizens who travel within Europe and also outside of Europe? Since the number that travel outside Europe are far larger than the numbers that are within Europe. So I think that is an important step we all have to consider for future. Thank you.
If we can gather 2 or 3 questions for our panelists to answer in the interest of efficiency, if there are 2 or 3 more questions. You better hope there are, because otherwise I start asking questions and then it gets nasty. So, any other questions from the audience? No, I think there's some sleepiness setting in which case I do have questions. You had the questions from the Maltese representative, and I think I'd be really interested to understand how, from a perception point of view, because several of you have touched on the perceptions issue and how we counter it, how do we reconcile what is clearly a cherished right when held personally, the right to free movement, the right to move from country to country, we all cherish, and yet deeply resented when seen in exercised by other people. And my starkest example of this is reading recently in the UK press an article that interviewed a number of British nationals retired in Spain who were extremely negative about free movement dynamics in their own countries of origin, without really thinking through the dynamics and the applicability to themselves. So there is that ability to exercise a right yourself and still not be able to transfer that psychologically to someone else, which I think makes the perceptions issue very difficult. And I wonder if you had any thoughts about how do we actually try to create that common interest in mobility that does seem to be lacking. Right now it seems to be a very selfish interest. When we look a little bit at the concept of diaspora, I think it's a very pertinent point to raise. Europe has had diaspora conferences, but they've been diaspora conferences of populations originating from outside the European Union. We don't consider our mobile EU citizens to be diasporas in themselves. And is that a worthwhile concept to explore from the European level? And how might you go about doing that, of creating a colloquium of what we call expats, or do we call them diasporas? Perhaps it's a terminology issue. If we can start in the order in which our speakers spoke, that would be great. Klára?
Thank you. I think about the perceptions. When I actually started my research, and perhaps you could also see that on one of my slides, that I was puzzled about the perceptions and the reality and the gap between them, and really what to do about the perceptions. But when I actually really kind of finalized more the research, I kind of tended to understand more the perceptions. And I think that I think it is a very relevant question. I also kind of put that question to myself: what the European Commission can do in this regard. It's a very good question. I think it is not enough to say that, okay, the European Social Fund, the 20% can be devoted to social inclusion. That's it. I think the European Commission should quite proactively think about, perhaps the European institutions in a wider sense, how to tackle that issue, how to, perhaps not only with financial resources, but also with, kind of information campaigns or with other and organizations like European throughout the world. So I think this could be a very important challenge and task ahead for perhaps for all of us who kind of try to deal with these issues at European level. And as regards diaspora, I think that the concept is still relevant on an intra-EU level. I don't think that we should just talk about expat. I think expats, okay, it's, yeah, there is some overlap, of course, between them, but I think diaspora, for me, is a relevant context because it actually refers to something which is, I mean, irrespective if you went to another country of the European Union or elsewhere. What is important here is really to maintain the link between the host country, between the country of origin and the diaspora, and try to really to use the potential of those skills which were required by the members of the diaspora abroad, and do it in a creative and quite proactive way. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I wish I could have a very clear and a good answer to how we can fight and what we can do with the perceptions. But I think also that this is obviously one of the reasons also why we would like to advocate for a European year, because this is an opportunity to change attitudes and to really do something very thorough. Then I don't believe that the European Commission alone can do anything about it, obviously. This has to be approached and tackled at the local level as well, and it has to be a lot of decentralized campaigns with the involvement of civil society. And I don't, because if the Commission issues a communication to say that, you know, this is all good, and we should all love mobility and the free movement, it won't change a lot, I believe. So it is one of the reasons why we do hope that we can mobilize all the different players on this. And that includes also, because when you focus on a specific theme for a year which involves all the different players, you also get a lot of media attention. And hopefully, in this respect, not just the negative attention that we have seen in some countries. But I don't think that we can completely avoid that there is a mixture in people's minds, even though we should try to address it, between what is legitimate free movement and mobility inside the EU for EU citizens, and the whole issue of immigration, because it depends on the country. If you are a southern country, I can assure you that it is very difficult to separate the issues, and we have seen that in the latest Eurobarometer, which was issued in November, actually that immigration has come up to be the number 3 issue of most concerns among citizens. And it comes from for the first time after unemployment and economy. And it has risen with 5% just the last 6 months. And that is, of course, a result of the fact what we are reading and what we see at the southern shores of the Mediterranean. And we also see that being on the 3rd level, you can also, in some of the member states, this is a #1 problem. And Malta is obviously one of the countries which is very much affected by this. So a one-size-fits-all communication campaign is not working. It has to take into account the national and local differences and the structure of movement and of mobility. But I do think that it is an opportunity and a necessity to grab the opportunity to try to get the facts right and to try to change the perception as such. There was a second issue, that was about having a convention, if it was worthwhile to have that at the European level. I would try it. But I know that there are those who would say that and argue that this is not an issue where you can bring together nationalities, different nationalities, because very often the issues are concern sort of the home country or the receiving country, and if you want to tackle the problems, maybe it's good to have someone to receive your problems or your complaints. But I still believe that it should be worthwhile, Raymond, to have something at the European level as well, just to see how that works out, because we are talking about the European right, and we're talking about the European challenges in connection with this right, so why not?
Well, thank you very much. I agree with everything which has been said, and I don't know whether there is much to add. Maybe to ask first your second question, one on diaspora. Personally, I don't think there's such a thing as one big European diaspora. It's a very diversified thing. First of all, I think that the way in which citizens are attached to their countries and want to sort of flock together with nationals abroad is very different. I come from a country where people do not necessarily seek somebody else from their own country when they go to America. They'd rather mix with the Americans. In other countries, there are different traditions. Then you have different communities of people who have gone abroad. You have people who have gone away for life. Usually that's the older generations. They have moved one day and for political or whatever reasons and never intended to come back, or at least never made it. And then you have people who change every year, every 2 years, or every 5 years, who are extremely mobile, who are not really at home anywhere. And obviously these communities have very different needs. That depends on age, it depends on education. It also depends on how attached they still are to their country. People may well be more interested to vote wherever they live rather than vote back home, and you have to make a choice. So it's difficult to cater for one diaspora. On the other hand, I think that member states should cater for these different needs, and they should have some kind of service for their citizens abroad. But it's not easy to have just one model. You have to be more creative than that. On the other question, what could the Commission do about unfortunate perceptions? First of all, I agree it's not just the job for the Commission, because the problem hasn't been caused just by the Commission. It has been caused much more, I think, on the one hand by popular press and by those political parties who feed the popular press and who benefit from the popular press. So as long as we have that kind of popular press, it will not be easy. I have a certain personal hope that with the diversification of the media and a lot more younger people in particular turning to the internet and having much more diversified flows of information, that phenomenon will change a little bit. I think that not only the Commission but also governments should work much more on facts. So really try to contradict with facts what the popular press are transporting on the one hand, but on the other hand, they also have to take people's perceptions seriously in a way, because people are afraid for their own work maybe. Sometimes people are also afraid with regard to their own culture and traditions. So I would advise politicians not only to say, listen, statistically the problem is very small, but take account of the fact that it is unevenly distributed. In certain communities the problem is much bigger than in others, and there you just have to take the people seriously, even if not the entire population is affected by the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start by the easy question regarding the citizenship report. Yes, there will be public consultation, as usually, online public consultation, Eurobarometer surveys, dedicated consultation before the report is issued, because in order to prepare the report, we will go back to the citizens especially and to other stakeholders to gather their input to feed the citizenship report. So the consultation will take place before. Normally after the summertime. After the summertime, so early after the summertime, yeah. Regarding the other question, which was easy because everybody replied for me, I would like to add, beyond what has been said, that this should also be taken from a broader perspective. It's not only about free movement that the question is being raised. We have started in the Commission, I would say, a mapping exercise of all activities which help to promote an inclusive society with respect and tolerance. And we believe that it's important to take it also from a broader perspective. This being said, I completely confirm all what has been said regarding the importance to work at different levels, including at the very local level, because we have seen that this good practice at local level are very important. And something we're also doing at the very, I would say, young and local level is also to work, for instance, with our colleague dealing with education, because this promotion of open society, and this is something they were themselves looking at, it's something that could also be discussed in schools. And I come from Brussels, so it's quite easy, but this reality of free movement is already there in the schools. So if they have this discussion as part of the curriculum in the schools, it's also a way to create this culture of respect and dispel misconception later on.
Thank you. I'm intrigued what you've been saying about social inclusion. At the Migration Policy Institute, we've just come to the end of 18 months research looking at exactly how integration policies intended for third country nationals and whether they should be mainstreamed into social inclusion policies as being able to target a broader population and deal with a diversity of needs rather than thinking of a one-size-fits-all approach. So I think thinking about this in terms of broader social inclusion allows you to deal with specificities, particularly in the schools.
Just at one point, we look at it from a broad perspective and so on. That does not mean that it can become all together, because if you do that, you will create false expectation. Mm-hmm. The rights are not the same on the basis of the treaty and the acquis, and you should not create this false expectation from people. I think that's an important point. And the rest is still valid, but it's important to keep this in mind.
Point taken. Unless there are any burning questions from the audience, the expressions on your face are beautiful, by the way. I would like to thank our panelists for such an attentive and interesting discussion, and hand over to Peter, who's going to give us the next directions.
First, a round of applause for a great panel.